The wind howled a lonely tune through the vast, snow-covered landscape of Alaska. It was a sound Elias knew intimately, a constant companion in his isolated life as a lumberjack. At 35, he was a man carved from the same rough timber he felled, strong, weathered and unyielding. His face, framed by a thick dark beard, was a map of hard living, each line etched by sun, wind and the relentless cold. He lived in a small, sturdy cabin he built himself, a sanctuary of pine logs and a warm hearth miles from the nearest town. His days were a rhythmic cycle of labor, the sharp, metallic ring of his axe against wood, the deep groan of a falling tree, and the satisfying ache in his muscles at day's end. This winter, the silence felt heavier than usual. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and into your soul, making the world feel empty save for the vast white expanse and the skeletal trees. One late afternoon, as the low winter sun cast long blue shadows, a sound broke through the familiar stillness. It was the high-pitched whine of a motor, a sound that was jarringly out of place. Soon, a large black sled, pulled by a powerful snowmobile, came into view, crunching through the deep snow. It stopped near the edge of his clearing, and a figure cloaked in a luxurious fur coat stepped out. It was a woman, and even from a distance her presence was striking, a stark contrast to the rugged landscape. She walked with an air of authority, her expensive boots leaving neat tracks in the pristine snow. She stopped a few feet from Elias, who had paused his work, axe in hand. Her face, framed by a hood, was pale and elegant, her eyes a piercing blue. She was the talk of the territory, a widow known only as the Gold Baroness, who had inherited a vast mining fortune after her husband's sudden death. She was said to be ruthless, brilliant, and untouchable. "You're Elias, the lumberjack?" she asked, her voice clear and carrying on the crisp air. It was a voice accustomed to giving orders. Elias nodded, leaning on his axe handle. "That's me. You lost?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "No, I'm here for you." He frowned, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't sell my timber to the likes of you, ma'am. I have my own buyers." She laughed, a low, melodic sound. "I'm not here for your timber, Mr. Elias. I'm here to offer you a proposition." She gestured to the sled. "I have a sum of money with me that will change your life, enough to buy a small town if you wished. I want you to spend one night with me, and it's all yours." Elias stared at her, his mind struggling to process her words. The cold wind seemed to have frozen his thoughts. "A fortune for one night," he repeated, his voice incredulous. "Why, what could you possibly want from me?" Her expression softened, a flicker of something Elias couldn't name passing through her eyes. "My husband died a year ago, a mining accident. We had been together for 30 years, and I don't feel anything anymore. Not the cold, not the pain of loss. I want to feel something again, just for one night. I heard about you, the quiet lumberjack who lives alone, a man of simple pleasures and honest work. You represent everything my world is not, and I'm willing to pay any price for that." The offer was absurd, a fantasy in the desolate reality of his life. But he looked at her, truly looked at her. Her beautiful, wealthy facade hid a profound loneliness that he, a lonely man himself, recognized instantly. It was the same emptiness that haunted him, despite the physical toil of his days. A shared silence. He thought of the money, a fortune. He could leave this unforgiving land, travel and start a new life. He could help the small, struggling community of trappers and miners who sometimes traded with him. The possibilities were endless, but the price felt too high, even if it was just one night. It was his pride, his solitude, his very identity. "I can't," he said, the words a raw whisper. Her face, which had held a fragile hope, hardened again. "Why not?" You're a lonely man, aren't you? Living out here like a ghost. This money could set you free." Elias looked away, towards the setting sun casting a fiery glow on the horizon. He thought of his parents, the memory of their kind faces fading with each passing year. He thought of the one true love he had lost to a fever years ago. He thought of all the silent nights, the endless work, and the silent, gnawing emptiness. He turned back to face her, his gaze meeting her icy blue eyes. He had an idea, a strange impulse that came from a place he didn't even know existed within him. He was not a man of grand gestures, but this felt like one. It was a question, an offer, an act of defiance, and a desperate plea all at once. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm, "but not for your money." The gold Baroness's eyes widened. She stared at him, speechless for a moment. Then slowly, a flicker of genuine surprise and perhaps a touch of confusion replaced the practiced indifference on her face. What he asked of her in return was something she had never encountered before. What he asked shook her to the very core, because what he asked was this: "I want you to tell me your story, the true story of your life, not the one the world knows, the one you keep hidden." The offer hung in the frigid air between them, heavy with unspoken questions. The Gold Baroness, a woman who controlled a vast empire and moved through society with an impenetrable shield, was momentarily disarmed. Elias's request was not for a material possession nor for a physical act, but for something far more valuable and terrifying to her: vulnerability. She stared at him, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. He wasn't asking for her wealth, but for her humanity. It was a challenge she hadn't anticipated, and for the first time in years she felt a flicker of something akin to fear. Not of him, but of the prospect of opening herself up. "My story?" she finally asked, her voice a fragile whisper, a stark contrast to her earlier commanding tone. "What could you possibly want to know?" "Everything," Elias replied simply, a warmth in his eyes that had been absent before. "The good and the bad. The things that made you who you are today. The things that broke you." For a long moment, she considered his words. The biting cold of the Alaskan winter seemed to recede, replaced by the silent intensity of their standoff. The Gold Baroness, known for her sharp intellect and strategic mind, found herself at a crossroads. She could turn and leave, her offer rejected, her mission a failure. Or she could accept his strange and oddly compelling counter-proposition. A single, shaky breath escaped her lips, forming a small cloud in the air. "Come," she said, her voice now filled with a new, hesitant sincerity. "Let's go to your cabin. It's too cold out here for storytelling." Elias led the way, his boots crunching on the packed snow. She followed, her expensive coat rustling softly. Inside his cabin, a wave of warmth and the scent of pine and wood smoke enveloped them. Elias lit a few more candles, casting a soft golden glow that chased away the encroaching shadows. He stoked the fire, its flames dancing and crackling, and gestured for her to sit on the small bench near the hearth. He poured her a cup of strong black coffee, a simple gesture of hospitality she likely hadn't experienced in years. As she warmed her hands around the steaming mug, she looked around the cabin. It was small, but meticulously clean, everything in its place. A shelf held a few worn books, a harmonica, and a small carved wooden bear. It was a life of purpose and solitude, and she found herself envying its simplicity. She began to speak, her voice low at first, a story unfolding slowly. She told him of her real name, Sarah, and of a childhood spent in poverty, of a family struggling to survive in a small mining town. She spoke of her early dreams, not of wealth, but of a life of stability and warmth. "I married my husband not for love, but for a promise," she admitted, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames. He was a prospector, older and ambitious. He promised me a life free from want. He gave me that and more. He was a good man in his own way, but our relationship was a partnership, a business. There was no romance, no true connection, just two people building an empire from dirt and rock. She recounted the relentless pursuit of gold, the dangers, the betrayals, and the sacrifices. She spoke of the emotional toll it took, of the gradual hardening of her heart as she learned to survive in a man's world. She told him about the day her husband died, and how she felt nothing but a cold sense of duty, a need to protect what they had built. She described the weight of her inheritance, a fortune that had become a cage, isolating her from a world she no longer understood. Elias listened in silence, his eyes fixed on her. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge. He simply absorbed her words, a quiet anchor in the storm of her confession. For the first time she felt seen, not as the gold Baroness, but as Sarah, a woman who had lost her way. As the night wore on, the fire crackled, and the snow fell softly outside. The world was reduced to the small, intimate space of the cabin. She told him of her loneliness, a profound emptiness that her wealth could not fill. She confessed that her visit to his cabin was not just a whim, but a desperate act, a last-ditch attempt to find a flicker of a feeling she had forgotten. The conversation shifted, flowing naturally. Elias shared his own story, not of grand adventures, but of quiet moments. He spoke of his love for the land, the satisfaction of working with his hands, and the enduring pain of losing the woman he had hoped to marry. He spoke of the beauty of the northern lights, the sound of a wolf's howl, and the comfort of the solitary life he had chosen. Hours passed, a strange intimacy blossoming between them. It was a conversation of two lost souls, one who had everything and one who had nothing, but who both understood the true meaning of loneliness. The dawn, when it finally came, brought a soft, pearlescent light to the cabin windows. Sarah looked at him, her eyes no longer hard but filled with a profound and unfamiliar vulnerability. I have never told anyone any of that, she admitted, the words catching in her throat. Elias smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. And I have never heard such a story. Thank you. She stood, the fur coat seeming to weigh her down. I must go. The fortune. It's still yours. Just tell me where to send it. Elias stood up and walked to the door, opening it to a world now blanketed in a fresh layer of snow. The air was crisp and clean. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of sincerity and warmth. Keep it, he said simply. What you gave me tonight, it was worth more than any gold. He rejected her offer a second time, a profound act of kindness that showed he saw beyond her wealth. As she left, Sarah felt a new sense of emptiness, not from loneliness, but from the void her confession had filled. Elias, in turn, felt a deep peace. He had found something more valuable than a fortune, genuine human connection. Weeks later, as spring began to melt the snow, Sarah returned. This time, she wasn't the Baroness du Uro, but just Sarah. She brought him a warm loaf of bread and homemade jam, a simple gift that meant more to him than gold. She told him that their conversation had made her realize she was living a life she didn't want. Her visits became more frequent, and their bond deepened into a quiet, steadfast friendship. They learned that true wealth isn't found in gold, but in a shared story, a simple gift and a genuine connection. Their lives, once defined by solitude or fortune, were now shaped by a beautiful, unexpected friendship, proving that the greatest treasures are the bonds we forge with others.